Hello and welcome everybody. I'm sure if you are active on our Discord community and on our, social media profiles as well, you must know that we have just started with another month-long hackathon, and this time it's with Hypermode. So, everybody who is joining us, this webinar is all about what is this hackathon about, and also what is hypermode, what is modus, and what are we supposed to build in this hackathon. So, I hope you are excited. And with me, I have people from the Hypermode team who I will introduce in just a second. And if you are here for the first time, or if you have participated in hashtag hackathons before, let us know in the comments below. I would like to know how excited you are for this hackathon, or if you are joining us from any part of the world. Also, let us know where you are from. Just keep the chat going while we tell you all about the hackathon and about Modus and Hypermode. So, without any more ado, let's invite on stage Jay. Hi, Jay. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
All good as well. So, I know what this hackathon is all about, but maybe before we introduce more to Modus Hack or also to Modus and to Hypermode, maybe we can start with a little bit of introduction. I can go first since anybody who has been active on Hashnow's channel probably knows me. Hi, this is Hemantika, and I currently work at Hashnode as a developer advocate. And today I will be here, just accompanying Jay while he showed some cool things around Modus. But that's all about me. And now over to you, Jay. Jay, tell us who you are and what do you do at Hypermode, anything and everything else that you want to add.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a software engineer at Hypermode. Currently been working on Modus, our open source framework for app developers, essentially. So Hypermode in general is like a backend developer's like dream, essentially, like being able to build from an API layer down to a database, which we pre-existingly owned called dgraph, a graph database. So this entire like full stack of how exactly you develop using this like framework is like redefined essentially with our new open source framework called Modus, where we make it super easy, just like write functions and then instantly get APIs exposed for those. So kind of just going through that, I can kind of dive right into how exactly to get this started, what you can do with this, and kind of just go through that if that's good with you.
Yeah, I think before we get into Modus, let us introduce our audience to what the Modus hack is all about and how long it is going to be. It's just started from today, and what are we expecting out of it. So what I'll do is I'll just start sharing my screen, and I'll give a quick rundown of what exactly is Modus hack and what we're expecting. So I hope you can see my screen. Yes, perfect. Hi, everybody. We are excited to announce Modus Hack, which is a hackathon by Hypermode and Hashnode. And like Jay was mentioning, this is all about building with Modus, and he will be showing you what all Modus can do, what Modus is. So that's for the later part. But for now, we have prizes up to $10,000 to give away, and if you really want to win those, you need to pay very big, very much attention to this webinar, because that is when you'll get to know what Modus is and what you can build with it. But other than that, there is also a list of app ideas that we have listed for you. So if you're out of ideas and you need more ideas, you can get ideas from here, or you can also join the Hypermode and the Hashnode Discord channel. That is where the engineers from Hypermode will be there to help you. And if you have any hackathon related doubts, that is where our Hashnode community will be there to help you. Now we have talked about what Modus Hack is, and also let's go a little bit on how long it's going to be for. It's starting today and it will end on November 30th. So you have 1 month to learn new technology, to play around with it, and to have something cool, or have build something cool. And I think the best part is that it's a long weekend, so if you are following us on this webinar today, you will learn something new, and you'll also have time to build something cool over the weekend. And as I showed before, you can play around with the app ideas that we have listed and try to build something out of it. And basically the challenge is to build for you to build something unique with Modus. And there is a lot of templates and ideas that we have, but if you can build something new and creative, that's great. And for judging, the main criteria that we'll have is innovation, how original or creative is your project. And then we'll have relevance, how well does the project use Modus. Presentation, how good are you writing the blog, or what kind of demo are you building, is it hosted, blah blah blah. Make you are, you are free to use your creativity and your ideas to know how to present your submission for the hackathon. Then we'll also have judge based on completeness, how complete is the project, is the blog complete, is does it have all the necessary functions. And also we'll judge on educational value, based on how effectively the project helps and if others understand the concept that is covers. So the main things that you need to, the submission guidelines that you need to follow is: first, start by creating a hypermode account. Then you need to build app using Modus. And if you want any help, you can join the your hypermode Discord community. And for submitting a project, you need to write a blog post on Hashnode and make sure that you use the slash Modus hack tag on Hashnode, because that is how we will track your entry. Make sure you have a GitHub repository link. It's open sourced. Add a license. That's very important for any open source project. And an optional video, demo, or presentation works best. And once you're done with the hackathon, you can tag Hypermode and Hashnode on Twitter or on LinkedIn as well, and you can use the hashtag ModusHack. So that's all in all everything about the hackathon that you need to know. But if you have any questions, we are right here, and I'll also share this link so that you get to know, or you get to see the landing page and you get to know everything about the hackathon. With that, I will end this, and now the stage is all up to you, Jay. But let me know if there's anything that I missed and anything that you felt I could have covered while I was talking about the hackathon.
I think you got most of it. Yeah, I think we're good there.
Amazing. Cool. So now the stage is all yours. Let me know if you're ready to present, and I'll add your screen.
Yeah,
You're
I'm good.
good?
We can start.
Perfect. There you go.
Yeah. So just to dive right in, like how exactly do you start developing with Modus? It's kind of like the overall like theme for today. So just to go through the basic stuff, we have a Modus CLI, which will help you essentially get your project up and running. So what you can do here is follow the Hypermode docs. You can go to docs.hypermode.com/Modus, and you'll see at the bottom here, there's a tools Modus CLI section. Here you can come in and see how to actually install the CLI. So you can just copy this command, and we'll take it over to a terminal to run it. And you'll see that when you do that, you get like your little Modus CLI getting installed, and it'll essentially in the background download all the requirements for the entire app framework and bring it to you locally, essentially. So now what you're able to do is in a few seconds, you'll see that we now have our Modus CLI that's installed, and you can source that just to get it started. And
Sorry, Jay, can you
yeah,
maybe expand or increase the
uh,
font a bit?
oh yeah,
Yeah, it's
I can, there we go.
yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so once you have this, there's a couple of commands you can use with Modus. You'll see that we have a Modus build, Modus Dev, Modus Info, and Modus New. So just going through one by one, Modus New will help you create a new project for Modus, and Dev will help you essentially track that a project, build it, and run it locally, essentially. So for now, we can start off with Modus New and instantiate a new project. We'll use Golang as our language and create a new project with the repository, and we'll just continue. And you'll see that now we have this new project called True Tactic. We can open that up. And you'll see that we now have essentially a scaffolded uh, like VS Code with all the code for it. And just to show you guys, like I've kind of gone ahead and done a lot of this ahead of time. So you can see that this is what we have like once you get an entire project up and running. So just to walk you guys through what exactly you can do with Modus, right? So we have a couple of SDKs that we've like established that allow you to A, invoke models, B, call HTTP requests if you want to do any outgoing requests, and C, query a database, Postgres, for example, right? So a lot of this is more interesting because in a WASM environment, it's all completely sandboxed, right? where like your code is entirely run inside of your singular cluster. And so because of that, you have to actually instantiate where exactly you want to connect to externally for security reasons, right? So we can go through that in the modus.json, which we call our manifest. So when you go into your modus.json, you'll see that you have a couple of things instantiated, right? Like where exactly are you actually going to be exposing whatever you write in Modus, right? So here you can just like say that I want to create a new GraphQL endpoint with a bearer token on this specific path called /GraphQL, right? So what this does is when you build your Modus app, it will take all the functions you write and expose it as a GraphQL API with its own schema and everything, all auto scaffolded for you, and put that on this endpoint specifically. So I can show you that towards the end once we show off the code we've done. And you can also see that we also like add in models that we are able to access. So in this case, you can see that we're using the Llama 3.1 model straight from Hugging Face that's hosted by Hypermode. So what Hypermode actually supports is being able to use any model from Hugging Face and hosting that ourselves. So you'd be able to access all these models yourself locally as well, right? So it gives you like full access to the full like Hugging Face catalog of models out of the box, which is pretty interesting, I think. And you'll see here we have a couple of connections instantiated here, right? So we have a HTTP connection to a ZenQuotes API. Essentially, this is just for demo purposes, just to show that you can make an API request to some website and come back with a response. And then a Postgres one as well, so you can actually modify your database. I mean, a lot of people with backend applications have their own databases set up, and so this allows you to integrate Modus with that. So let's go straight into the code then. With Modus, like here's actually how you invoke a model, for example, right? You can see that here we're invoking or importing two different packages, right? We have the Modus SDK, which imports the models, and then the OpenAI specific model, right? So this is a super basic function that is just used to generate text using an LLM. I can zoom in one more if necessary. And you can see here that this function is just to essentially take any prompt that a user gives and then generate a response for that using an LLM. So you can see here that we're first fetching the model in code entirely. You can see here like we're just fetching a model, the OpenAI chat model, and we're calling it text generator. If you remember back to the Modus JSON, here we instantiated that this model, the Llama 3.1, is called the text generator model, right? And so we're using the OpenAI's API layer to actually integrate with that Llama. And so here you can see that we're going to create a new input, tell it that you're a helpful Llama assistant, try and be concise as possible, and then pass in the user prompt, right? And so what you can see is like we're doing a couple of invocations and then just outputting that string, right? So this singular function is its own API. So if we go over to Postman just to take a look, you can see that that generate text now has its own API completely exposed by just Modus itself. You didn't have to write any API schema. There was no like scaffolding around that. You just write your function and it automatically gets exposed on this API endpoint. And let's ask what is hash node. And we'll send this request. And you'll see that it comes back with a response. Hash node is a blog publishing, blah, blah, blah. And so all this model is being hosted entirely on the cloud, and all of our work is being done locally. So you're actually able to access that model remotely yourself. There's no like need to pay for the model or anything like that, right? So
Just a question. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is really cool. I love how this works. So like when I was building my side projects and everything with ChatGPT or other APIs, I needed to generate a key and everything. So I don't need to do that. I can do that with Modus, right?
Yeah,
That's cool.
exactly. So this is all hosted there. You don't need to access it with a model or anything. You just need to log in through Hypermode. Once you have your account, you can connect to the Hype CLI. Actually, I can go over that later as well. But yeah, this won't require any API keys, anything like that. So
And
it's
are there
super easy
any
out of the box.
sorry
Go
sorry to
ahead.
cut you off, and are there any rate limits or any quotas or anything from Hypermode's end like that we need to take care of?
As of right now, there isn't, but we'll keep track of that in the Discord. If it blows up or something, then we'll
Yeah.
we'll let you guys know. But yeah.
Right. Cool.
So going back, so that was the generate text. That's a single API, right? And you can see here now, this is showing off the HTTP request. You saw the ZenQuotes example that we had there. So now we're sending a request to the ZenQuotes API, fetching the response and unmarshalling that into a type quote, and just outputting the first one we see, right? That one's also pretty simple. We'll go through that really quickly. Fetch quote, and you can see that it comes back with Chris Mercandle's quote, "Happiness is only real when shared." Just a quick example to show what you can do with the HTTP request client. And now the more interesting thing that I see with Modus is actually you're able to link all these things together, right? Like being able to define models in code actually makes a big difference in my opinion, right? So now you're able to do things like combine things together, right? You can see that we take we'll take, for example, this first fetch quote that we did, this function here, and now we'll actually call that first within this function called fetch quote and author info. And then what we'll do is we'll take that info and then now we'll use that to feed to our text, right? So you can see that now we're generating text saying like, hey, who exactly is this author? Give me some information about the quote's author now, right? And so since this is all defined in code, this is basically like a recipe for like creating like agentic processes using models, right? You can have uh, existing like databases and whatever. You can feed that information into your models now and actually do more like cohesive app frameworks essentially. Like that's the whole idea here. So just showing that off really quickly. Fetch quote and add author info. We can fetch the quote and take a look at who that actual author was, right? And you can see that this is someone named Norman Vincent Palais. Like I don't know who that is. We'll ask the model. It says that he's an American minister and motivational speaker who wrote this book, right? Pretty interesting, right? So showing off those two. Now let's go on to the third piece, which is actually writing to a database. A lot of backends, right? Like personally, when developing the Hypermode console, I found it really frustrating to actually like develop locally and actually like make database changes and test them locally. That was one of my biggest like pet peeves, and actually adding this support for databases really like improved that like quality of life feature. So here you can see that now we're fetching the quote and author from the previous function, right? And we're just chaining that together with a new like Postgres request. So you can see that we're doing Postgres execution to what we call Postgres here, and then this specific SQL statement, right? I want to insert into a table called quotes with these three columns with these values, right? And if you remember back to Modus JSON here as well, you'll see that I had a local host Postgres instance running, and I'm able to connect to that. And if you notice here, like we have this bracket username. That's our way of actually saying, these are some secrets. I don't want to actually show them off. This is local, so I can show you guys. It's not a big deal. But yeah, you can actually specify that in the env dev local. So this allows you for, if you want to commit things to your remote repository that has like some secret information, just put that in your local, and you don't have to worry about that as well, right? So we handle all these like security features as well. So once you do that, you can see that we're now, putting into the database and then returning the number of rows. And then we have a second one to just fetch the rows of the database as well, right? So I pre-set up this database just to be transparent, but I have the schema migrations you would need to do this if you want to run this locally and see how this works. And you can take a look at the Postico account here. So this is our database really quickly. I already inserted one just to show it off. So, now that we have this, we can run that, see what happens. So now we're doing the same thing as before, right? We're just fetching the quote and then now inserting to the DB, right? So let's close this and this. So we're fetching the quote, adding to the DB, we'll run it, and you'll see that it'll come back and say, I've added one row to the database. If we go and look in Postico, refresh, you'll see that now we have this new Marcus Aurelius quote, right? And that got inserted. So it's able to do A, fetching a quote, B, going to the Llama model, making some invocation, and then it was able to write to the database, right? So like this full process was all done within 100 lines of code, right? It was really small, and it's super simple. Just like create like these like workflow processes that you can integrate into your backend or build your entire backend using Modus as well. And then just to for completion, I'll show that you can fetch quotes from the database. And you can see here that we now see the John Lennon and the Marcus Aurelius quote are both there. So yeah, just to summarize essentially, like this like idea of having like these workflow processes and chain like different, what would essentially be like if you want to go access OpenAI, you would have to go and make HTTP request call there, decipher their API call, go and write to your database. All this like being done in a singular place makes it super easy just to modify your backend really easily. And if you saw like one of the cool things about Hypermode is actually the development process is super fast, right? So actually one really quick thing I can show you is, let's say in the model itself, right? You want to change something about the model or and say like, hey, actually, I want you to be, you're not a helpful assistant. Say that you are named, say you are named a llama every time you respond to a question. Right. So like if you see in the Modus Dev, what happens is we're actually rebuilding the Modus app in real time. And you can see we had It'll take a second, but once it's ready, you'll see that we're actually able to spin up the entire API all over again really fast. Like if you were to host this on some external API service, this would take you, 30 to 40 minutes, right? But here the development process is super fast and allows you to essentially just like make stuff happen really fast, essentially. So who are you? And now you'll
This
see
is really
that,
cool.
yeah. And now you can see that
But
it updates and
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, there's a question as well. So
Mhm.
one of our hackers is asking that how fast is this compared to LangChain or something? Some
Yeah. So benchmarks aren't available yet. We're still working on those, but we are, from what we've seen, is we are faster than LangChain just because we're running in WebAssembly, which is entirely sandboxed and is designed to be super fast. It's supposed to run in the browser, right? We kind of hijacked it and used it for this process, but yeah, it is much faster than LangChain, and in our opinion, a much easier developer experience than LangChain as well. But yeah.
That's amazing. And I have a question from my end. So, what LLMs are, like, is Modus supporting out of the box? I think we talked a bit about OpenAI. We know about Llama as well. So, what else can, or what models can people use?
Yeah, so we have Anthropic support. If you have an Anthropic account, you can use that. That will require you to pass in your own API key. Same with OpenAI as well. We can't actually, download those models and host them because they're proprietary, but Llama's open source, so we're able to do that. And you can see, if you want to see a list of models that you can like run on Hypermode without having to, have your own OpenAI account or pay for all that, we have like a list. It's kind of small right now, but we'll grow this over time and we'll put it in a more, official place somewhere. But essentially for now, we support Llama 3.1, some mini LM, which is essentially a vector model that allows you to take text, convert to a vector, a one that does like GitHub issue classification, and then one that does Distilbert fine tuning, essentially. So those are the models we support on Hypermode directly for
Amazing.
local
That's
development. Sorry, if you
yeah,
want to host on Hypermode, you can host basically any model, but this is just for if you want to run it locally as well.
yeah, exactly. Cool. This is really cool. Thanks for covering that.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, for the code, if anyone wants to take a look, it's in this repository in hypermode inc/modus recipes, and you'll see all the code here. This is all the stuff I had. If you want to run it, you just do Modus Dev on this, and it'll work out of the box, basically. But yeah, is there anything else I should cover, Hamadita?
I think we are good. Can you share the link to this one again? Is this the Modus 101, right?
Yeah, so it's in the repository called Modus recipes. I will put that in the chat, actually. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
I think
and
what you can cover as well is maybe we talked about like walk us to the platform. Let's say I am using Hypermode for the first time. So how does a first time hacker or a first time user actually log into the platform and get to this part where we actually get started with the code? So that I feel will be really helpful.
yeah, for sure. But just to be clear, you don't need to have a Hypermode account to actually work with Modus. That's the framework itself is completely separate. You can go and just install it using Modus CLI as I showed earlier. But if you wanted to, go and host this on Hypermode, for example, that would be straightforward as well. You just go to hypermode.com. I'm already logged in actually. Let me sign out and show. But essentially, you would come in here, sign in, and you'd be able to create your account. I already have one with Google, and you'll see that once you log in, you have essentially all the projects you've created, essentially, right? So what happens is you take your GitHub repository. Once you push that and add a specific workflow, you'll see that in a tutorial when you set up your Hypermode account. You'll see that it'll tell you like, hey, put this CI into your GitHub repository, and we'll pick it up and be able to essentially deploy that to the cloud directly, right? So you'll have your own endpoint that's not local if you want, and so that's how we essentially like host it on Hypermode. So yeah.
Cool, that is really helpful. And I think you mentioned a little bit about the APIs as well. So can you walk us through all the APIs or any cool ideas that you feel can be done? I know there's a list of ideas that we already have on our Modus Hack landing page, but other than that, is there any such ideas? For example, I'll talk to you about one of my ideas that went really viral on social media, and that was I built basically that was a GitHub roast app. So you need to just put your GitHub username, and OpenAI will do a bad roast about your profile. So do you think those kind of projects can be a cool thing to do with Modus, or any other ideas that you have, or the any of your favorite APIs that one can use with Modus and play around with it?
Yeah, so actually, one of the things we started earlier was something called Command K. So if you guys are familiar with other platforms like Linear, for example, you have like essentially a command, like Command K on Mac will allow you to do a global search across everything that you have, right? So Linear, for example, is a kind of like a Jira service, ticketing service. So you can search across projects and tickets and comments, everything, right? So the idea of being able to search globally using vector search is something that was super interesting to us that like we've been working on. So that's one of the things. The thing like personally I've been really interested in is actually redoing the entire. So this console right now is done using normal backends. Like we have like a Postgres database. We're hosting on an external API service, and it's all written in Golang and GraphQL, right? So actually, the perfect stack for us would be just to move this over to hypermode. So that's or to Modus, sorry. So that would be like that's actually my personal goal of like what I would try and do next is actually moving that over. So honestly, building an entire application on Modus would be the most interesting thing I could see. Obviously, the AI feature is also super cool. If you have an existing backend, adding in like vector search to improve your document search, for example, that was a big one, right? Like Algolia search is somewhat difficult right now. It's keyword based, right? So being able to access this and vector search would make it a lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I personally find vector search a very cool topic. So if anybody is building something with the command K part, it would be really nice to see how that turns out to be.
Yeah.
But um, other than that, I we still have a little 4 minutes for the webinar to end, and there is not much questions. So there was one question, and you have already answered that. So you now have to face my questions. And
All good.
cool. So one thing for me, like it's not really related to the hackathon, but if you had to differentiate or draw comparisons between hypermode and Modus, what would that mean, or how would that look like? Or let's say if you one had to draw similarities between hypermode and Modus, how would that be? And the reason why I ask is, let's say if there's a hacker who has already used hypermode before and they're now hearing about Modus for the first time, so if there is any familiarity or anything that they can refresh the memory with.
Yeah, so Hypermode essentially is the entity that is a company that owns Modus. So previously, before Modus was open source, we called them Hypermode functions. So that was like
Okay.
our V0.12 and before. That was all completely closed source. We weren't ready to open source that yet. But yeah, so if you're familiar with that, this is a super easy transition. It's just essentially an upgrade. So you would just go and install whatever changes you need, and you would be able to work with this out of the box. But at this point, yeah, Modus is completely its own framework. It's open source entirely, so you wouldn't have to deal with us, pay. You don't have to pay us any money realistically. Like you can do all this on your own. But yeah, that's like the whole idea. We just want people to try out this cool new thing we made. Essentially, that's kind of what it is.
Amazing. I love it. And with the demo that you just showed, I think it we can build really cool applications with it. I personally will try to build something cool. I cannot participate in the hackathon, sadly, but then I'll try to build something cool, and maybe it will show more hackers on what one can do with Modus. So I'll try to do that because the demo looked really, really cool. And
Thanks.
is there anything else that you want to show? Maybe if a dashboard or something that you feel is a very cool part of Modus and you didn't cover that in the demo?
I can just really quickly cover some of the hypermode stuff behind the scenes. Like some interesting things I found with hypermode are what we call like inference history, essentially. Like all these models you invoke, right? It's all cool. And one thing we found is like it's hard for people to track like A, how many tokens they're using, and B, like what exactly the model inferences happen once it's out of your control, right? Like these APIs, once you develop them, it's your users that end up using them, right? So in that case, like you would see here, like we have this thing called inference history where you can see every time someone invoked a model, what model they invoked, what the ID was. Like if you open this up, you can see what exactly they asked for. And then yeah, like, it just shows you like all this information about your model and the information that happened there. So yeah, it's like a lot of things are like with Hypermode, it's easier to like track all these things, right? You can see your models, you can see your function runs. These are all obviously like completely like if you want to work with Modus on your own, you're completely free to. But these are just like interesting things I find that you can use with Hypermode as well. But yeah.
Yeah, this is really cool. So let's say if I'm using Modus APIs, can I also see this in the inferences part? Let's say I'm using an API and building something, and then there are people who are using my application. Would I be also be able to see that on the inferences part?
Yes, exactly. So if you deployed your project to Hypermode, so we're hosting any Modus project essentially. That's what we do. at Hypermode. So in that case, once you host it with us, yes, all these things would come out of the box for you. So if your users start hitting your API repeatedly, you start seeing like some spike in traffic, and maybe like the models are taking too long to respond, right? You can go into your inference history and be like, hey, I can pinpoint it back to 10:30. This is when something happened, and my model started misreacting to responses or something like that. Someone like maybe like injected your prompt or something like that. These are things that are possible, right? So like you're able to track all that information.
Amazing, amazing. That's really cool. And from my end, that's all the questions that I had, and I don't see any questions on our comment section either. So I think we can end this one. And before I end, I would like to plug in Hypermost Discord channel. So if anybody here who is watching us and you plan to participate on the Modus hack, if you have any questions related to Modus or to Hypermode, you can join their Discord channel. I have just added the link here. And that's all from my end. And once again, thank you, Jay, for your time. It was a really cool demo. And I hope that gave a very nice overview to our viewers. And we'll be seeing some cool projects towards the end of this hackathon. So, once again, thank you, everybody, for joining. And thanks again, Jay, for your time. Is there anything that
Yeah.
you want to say before we end this live stream?
Just try out Modus, see if you like it. Let us know if you don't. Any feedback is welcome. Let us know what you think. But yeah.
Oh yes. Please give feedback to the team. I am sure that that will be very helpful to them. Cool. With that,
Cool.
that's it for this webinar. Oh, I forgot that we have another webinar which will be another hands-on, similar to this one, but it will be more on the AI and the data models part on 7th of November. I have shared the link here. So if you would like to see the more capabilities of Modus, join us on 7th November for a 1 hour long webinar. So it's going to be a very heavy one. So if you would like to build something more complex or more fun, join us for the one on 7th. And for the meantime, you have the weekend to use. So at any point, if you have any questions, you can join the Hypermode Discord community. You can also ping us on the Hashnote community if you have any questions related to the hackathon. So that's it for this one. And with that, I will end it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.